Alright, so this is where things start to get really interesting. Rather than just messing around with layouts and colors and backgrounds, we're going to start to write some actual code and build some interactivity into our apps. So the usual way to have some basic interactivity is to bring in a button. So select the button from the widget palette at the top left there, and then drag it in. I'm going to put it just underneath the Great App text view. We can put in some margins if you like, and feel free to experiment with different colors, styles, etc. But we'll focus on the code for now, so I'm not going to style that button in any way. But the button has a new attribute that text views don't have, and that is the onClick attribute. And this is where we can set a certain function or method to be called when that button is tapped by the user. So I'm going to call the method click function, and this is going to be the name of the chunk of code that's run when that button is tapped. All right, that now gives us an error because we haven't created the click function method yet. So let's go and do that over in mainActivity.java. So this is our first experience of Java. We saw the main activity file a few videos ago when we were touring Android Studio, but we didn't take a lot of time to actually see what it's doing. Let's quickly do that, and then we'll write the code for our click function method. So first off, the main activity is defining the package ID there. So we've got com.myappcompany.rob.example.app, as we saw when we created this particular project. Then we've got some import statements, and we're importing some frameworks there which allow us to use certain features of the Android OS. So our two frameworks here, we've got app.compat.activity, which contains the code that we need for our activity, which has an action bar at the top there, where it says example app. And then we've got the OS bundle for the Android OS itself. As we start to use new features here, we'll have to import the code for them up the top. Do that in a couple of minutes. Next, we're creating a class. Now, don't worry too much about the terminology here, but a class is essentially a chunk of code that contain variables, such as the content of a text field, and also functions or methods which contain more code. So the class that we're creating here is called mainActivity, and this is going to be the class that controls our activity that we've created. The class is public, meaning that it can be accessed from anywhere within the app, and it extends app.compat.activity, meaning that it takes all the code from app.compat.activity and allows us to use any methods or variables within the app.compat.activity class. And there's just one method here, and that's the onCreate method, is run when the activity is created or when it appears on the screen. There's a few keywords here, so just to run through what they mean. Again, don't get too hung up on the precise meaning of these, but it's good to have a rough idea of what they're there for. Override here tells the code that we know that the onCreate method already exists. It's actually in app.compat.activity, and we're just taking it further and adding some extra code to it here. So we're not creating the onCreate method, we're just adding to it. The method is defined as protected, which is similar to public, but slightly less public. So a protected method can be accessed from anywhere within our app, but not from outside the app. So it couldn't be accessed by general Android OS, for example. Then we've got this keyword void, which means that this method onCreate doesn't return anything. So for example, you could imagine a method that simply adds two numbers together. When that method is called, it returns the total of those two numbers. In contrast, this method doesn't return anything. It just does some things when the activity is created. The variable saved instance state is passed to the onCreate method. So that is that if we want to, we can write some code that depends on the state of the instance, or essentially the device at that time. That could be used, for example, to tell whether the user is logged in when displaying the appropriate activity. And then we've got two more methods. The first is super.onCreate, and the super here refers to the onCreate method that we mentioned already exists in app compat activity. So it will run the code to create the activity, and then it will run our code. And finally, we're setting the content view, which just links the activity with this particular layout, the activity_main.xml that we've created here. Phew. So quite a lot of high-level Java there. As I say, don't worry too much about the precise meaning of all of that, as long as you've got a rough idea of what's going on and that this code is setting up our activity. So if you remember, what we were trying to do here is create our click function that will be called when our button is tapped. So we'll do that in much the same way that we've created our main activity class here. We'll start with public to create a public method, and then we'll add the keyword void because our method is not going to return anything, it's just going to do something. And then our method is called click function, and because the method is called by the button and the button is a view, the click function method will require a single variable, and that variable will have a type of view with a capital V, and the specific value of that variable we'll call view with a little v. And because we're now working with views in our code, we're going to need to import the class for view. So if we just click on the view there, and then you can see, if I can make that a display, there we go. See the symbol there implies that if we press Alt and then Enter, that will add the view class for us so that we can use all the view methods. So to run that again, we've created a public method which doesn't return anything. It's called click function, and it takes a variable called view, which is a type of view. So whenever you create a variable in Java, you have the type of variable first, which usually starts with a capital letter, and then you have the variable itself, which is often the same as the type, but not always. But it always starts with a lowercase letter. And this view will be the name of the UI element which calls the function, which in our case is going to be that button. And you can see that we've still got a warning there, but we don't have the error anymore because the code can see that we've created this function. All right. Then we're going to add some open curly brackets. You can see Android Studio automatically closes those curly brackets, and that's how we contain the code for our method. Phew. Stick with me. We're almost there. We've just got one line of code to write. You might be wondering, how are we going to get some interaction? What are we going to do when this button is pressed? Well, with Android Studio, when you're running an app in the emulator, there are some logs which we can use to interact with our app. So you can see we've got a load of information there in our logs, which is telling us what's going on behind the scenes, but we can actually add some code to this log if we want to, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. So I can just log a button click in the logs down here. And we can do that using capital L, OG for log. And then we need a particular type of log. So we use dot, and then I'm going to use I for info. You can see we've got a few other options there. E for error is a very common one, but this isn't an error. In fact, it tells us that everything's going well. So we'll use I for info. And then you can see that we need to add the log class for that. So Alt Enter will add that in for us. And then in quotes, we add a tag, which is just anything that we want to put there, describe the type of log entry that we're making here. So I'll just put info. We could put anything we wanted there, just a category really. And then the particular log. So you can see Android Studio 3 does this in a way that Android Studio 2 didn't. It adds some nice helpful descriptions as to what each of these variables are. So the tag is info and the message is whatever we want. So I'm going to put button pressed. And then you can see we've got a little red squiggly line there telling us that something's wrong with our code. And that's because at the end of a line of code in Java, you always put a semicolon. And you'll be relieved to hear that we're now done. So we can run our app. And we should now be able to see the button in the app. And when we press it, with any luck, the button pressed message will appear in the logs here. There it is. There's our button. Press it, and there it is. Hurrah! If you managed to do that, congratulations. Do it as many times as you like. That is your first bit of Java code that you've written from scratch and running within your Android app. So it might not look hugely impressive, but this is actually a really big step forward and the beginning of how all interactivity with your apps is going to be designed. Wonderful. Now, of course, we did quite a lot of stuff there, so I'm going to set you a challenge to do all of this yourself, and we're actually going to create a brand new app. Rather than working with the same app every time, we're going to create a new app which we'll call Interactivity Demo. And it's going to be very simple, just going to contain a single button, and you can log whatever you like when that button is pressed. So just very similar to what we've already got here. I want you to create the button, create the app, and then write the code to make that button display something in the logs. All right, so this is going to be putting everything together in one go. Hope it goes well. Good luck. Off you go. All right. I hope you enjoyed that one and you managed to do it. I'm just going to get rid of that interactivity demo, and then I'm going to close my existing project and start a new one. So as we said, it's going to be called Interactivity Demo. I'm going to leave everything else the same. Next, leave all that the same. Empty activity, wonderful. And main activity is the name for our activity. Great stuff. So then Android Studio should kick into action. Our Gradle will put everything together. And here we go. So I'm going to jump over to our layout first of all. We're nearly there. Good stuff. And then we'll get rid of our text view and add in our button. Wonderful. I'm not too worried about layout, but I'll just add the margins in there. Okay. And I'm going to leave the onClick method empty for the moment, just to show you another way round of doing it. If you want to write it in there, you're very welcome to. But if we create the code first, then it will auto fill that box for us. So let's create our method. It's going to be a public method. It's not going to return anything. So it's void. And as before, I'll call it click function. You might want to call it something more expressive, feel free. And it takes a variable of a type view, which will require us to add the view class. And the variable name is going to be view with a little v. There we go. And now that we've created that method, we can actually go back. And if we now click on the drop down in the onClick method, you can see it has that function for us. So whichever way makes more sense to you really, to add it there or write the code first and then add it. And hopefully you remember we log with a capital L, and we're going to use an info log. And then we're going to set the tag to info. And this time, just for a bit of variety, I'll use it worked as the message. And of course, we don't forget our semicolon at the end. Make sure we've got all of our classes. Yep, there they are. All right, let's give it a go. So because this is a new app, we need to select deployment target. We're going to stick to the same device. And now let's wait for our app to compile and display. In fact, we'll just get the logs up and running. Here we go. So there's our button. Let's tap it, and indeed it worked. Fantastic. So I hope you have a shiver of excitement going down your back as you managed to make that work. I certainly did. It's really not an overstatement to say that all apps are built on this basic interactivity. Having said that, it's not a great level of interactivity. All the user can do is press a button. So what we might want to do is get a bit more information from the user. So we might want to have a text field, for example, where the user can enter some text and then something is done with that using the button. And that's what we're going to learn how to do in the next video.